Okay, guys, so we are going to get into this week's midweek breakdown, going over Isaiah 16 through 20. This week will mark our 1/3 of the way through our study of the book of Isaiah, and I'm going to give you the scores because although we are 1/3 of the way through, the scores are super close, and I want you guys to understand that the homework is what, at this point in time, is going to get you over into first place. But right now, in first place is 38 points, and that is the Savior to come in first. In second place is the Cockroaches with 36 points. I want to point out again that if the Cockroaches would have done their homework, they would still be in first, if not tied for first or in first place, but because no one did the homework for that team, they didn't get any of those 5 points, which put them actually into second place. In third place, we have God is Good with 34 points, and then followed by Falisha So Cool with 32 points. The cool thing about this right now is that any of you guys could win this competition. It's all about if you discuss or you help with the group discussion, and that's going to give you 5 points. And then if everyone does their homework, that's 5 points. I have not yet had an entire team turn in all of their work completed, so no one's gotten 5 full points from the homework yet. But if you get everyone to do that, that's what's going to put you ahead. Of course, the games might get you a little bit of points, but those two are what's going to actually set you above anybody else. So let's stay focused. Okay, we are 1/3 of the way through. We got 8 weeks left of this study, and I need you guys to continue to read, ask questions, ask your adults questions, use the resources you have available, and just continue to push forward. I know that we are kind of hitting a part of the study that's a little bit harder to understand, so use the resources you have, ask the questions. You can always ask me, you can ask Berna, ask one of your adults. You have an adult around you sometimes, so ask them questions. Of course, your youth leaders, ask anybody some questions. Make sure you are understanding the study because that's what's going to help you the most. So let's get down into the breakdown of this specific portion of scripture. So it's going to be Isaiah 16 through 20, which we read on Wednesday. So I'm just going to break it down a little bit more. If you remember from last week, chapter 15 actually starts a prophecy or an oracle over the country or the nation of Moab, and chapter 16 just finishes it out. So if you actually look into any of these oracles, you actually see a little bit of poetry in how they are written. And 15 and 16 give us this poem or this description that has a little bit more of a heartfelt background to it, a little bit more of a concern, a lot more emphasis, a present tense written on the words, which is intriguing because Hebrew is not necessarily a language that uses a lot of present tense verbs, especially when translating. But we actually see through this oracle in chapters 15 and 16 this description and almost this idea of, you see what Isaiah is actually seeing as he's giving this oracle. And when read, it kind of puts you in perspective. Like, he's seeing all of this happen before it even happens, but he's seeing it as if it's happening in real time. So this chapter, it just goes into Moab being laid to waste, right? It's being undone. This country is coming undone due to the judgment, the righteous judgment that's been placed on it by the Lord. And so chapter 16 continues in this, right? After we get through all of these towns in chapter 15 that are going to be laid to waste, we get into chapter 16, and it's almost like a switch in the terminology, almost to an extent. It goes from talking about everything that's going to happen to Moab, and then he kind of brings this almost like this light, this hope brought back into it of when the oppressor is no more and destruction is ceased, and he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land, then a throne will be established in steadfast love, and on it will sit in faithfulness. Like he switches from this doom and this gloom into this hopeful scenario that'll come in the latter days, and it kind of just brings this reassurance. So if you look through chapters 13 through 27, you're going to see a lot of prophecies to the nations, a lot of destruction, a lot of hope, and you have to look for both of those throughout this words. But that's the main thing I want us to focus on in chapter 16 is this connection, this transfer of emotion that you actually see through 15 and 16, and the hope that he brings in it. And then he ends, and this is what I want you guys to understand, is the way that this chapter ends is with this great multitude of the nation of Moab actually being brought to few and feeble. So it's not left completely destroyed, but it's really, really close is what it's saying here. And it also states in this chapter, Isaiah goes on and he says, therefore I weep with the weeping. Like Isaiah is crying as he's seeing this, he's weeping with it. There's a lot of emotion in this chapter. I think the questions on your paper this week ask about what steadfast love is. I mean, it says, how did it word it? The throne will be established in steadfast love. So I want you guys to really focus on, what does steadfast love mean? What is this? What does it mean to be steadfast in love? That's what's going to help you a little bit with the quiz, but also help you understand this throne that's going to be established. Which will bring us into chapter 17. Chapter 17, we get an oracle or a prophecy, right? So an oracle is like this statement of a prophetic thing to come. And so even though it says an oracle, it means the same thing, a prophecy of Damascus. So it gets straight into it. Like, it doesn't hold back any punches. It just goes, an oracle concerning Damascus. And then it goes, behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. Like, he doesn't milk his way into it. He doesn't slowly ease into this. He just goes, Damascus will cease to be a city. Which gives you this description of what's going to happen to Damascus, right? It will be deserted and disappear. The glory and the bounty of Damascus will be brought low, no longer yielding abundance, right? So once that happens, they will stop looking to things that they made, but rather the maker. They will turn from objects to the God who made them. So if we're looking into this chapter, we actually see that the reason for this judgment that's coming upon Damascus is more for what you see in verse 10 of this chapter, where it says, for you have forgotten the God of your salvation and have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Okay, and so in this, we see the reason. He said, you forgot who your God is. They've turned from the Creator, as you've seen in previous prophecies, is they turn from the Creator to the things that they themselves have created, and that's who they're hoping in. That's who they are putting all of their hope and their trust into and their energy into, is these things that they created. And which is why he says, so where was I? They were looking to these things that they created instead of to God. And what he was saying is he's placing, and you'll see it consistently, like throughout the study that we've already had, is he's taking the things that they have exalted high, and he's like, these are man-made. Like, these don't have the breath of life in them, and he's taking them out of place. So they understand that there's only one thing that truly works, and that is God. He says, you've forgotten your God, and for that you'll be scattered, dispersed, and humble. You see in this as well, it's going to be one of your questions, or maybe the only question actually in this chapter, is it talks about this harvest. We are in harvest season right now. And what you see is, if you look out into the fields, some of the fields have already been harvested, but it's full, it's abundant, it's to its max. So when he's talking about, yet the harvest will flee away in a day of grief and incurable pain, it's talking about the max potential that it has will flee away. You see, he's waiting for the day, he's waiting for the time where they're at their most, and then he's going to bring them back down and humble them, disperse them, and scatter them. And when I say humble, I don't mean like the simple, like, okay, I was humbled today, but rather you think you're up here, you think the things you created are up here, but really you're down here. And that's what he's doing at their most glorious, at their most fruitful, is when he's going to do this. That's when they add the word harvest in there, is what they're referring to. Chapter 18, an oracle concerning Cush. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but no one's here to correct me, so I'm going to continue with it. So this chapter goes into the destruction that will come upon Cush, stating, look for the signal raised on the mountains, listen for the horn, then you will know their destruction is coming just before the harvest, right? Meaning before their most abundance. So we see that in here twice, right? So it's talking about the harvest twice in a row. And again, just like I said, right, when they're right before their most abundance is when this is going to happen. So right before their peak of the season style of thing is actually when this destruction is going to happen, and they will be destroyed, and the tribute will be brought before the Lord. So this chapter is kind of short. It's to the point, though. It's this idea of this country who are feared, they are tall, they're smooth, they're mighty, they're conquering, right? That's who he's talking about here is Cush, and he's talking about their power, and he's saying that when you see these signs, right, when you see the signal is raised in the mountains, when the trumpet is blown, I will quietly look from my dwelling like a clear heat and sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. And that's when he says, they shall all of them be left to the birds of prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth. And so what he's saying here is like right when they get to their most high, like look for this signal, and when you see it, you will actually see my destruction come upon them. And so the one thing that I really want you guys to grasp in these last two chapters I just talked about, right? 17 and 18 is going to be that harvest that he is talking about, right? When they're at their most abundant. Because if you look consistently through the timeline, you'll see over and over again, people reach their almost their max potential. And through that, they actually start to lessen the value of God. You'll see it in Babylon as the empire gets greater and greater. The Babylonian king says, I will be the best God, I will be like the greatest God, and that is when he is lowered to his position. You look at the Tower of Babel, they are building it up to be into the heavens so they can reach heaven to be like God, and it's just that it's a pride and an arrogance is what he is constantly attacking. And he says, when you get to your most proud, when you get to your most arrogant, when you see the most of your own works is when I'm going to absolutely destroy you, because you're looking at yourself and you're not looking to me. And it's a consistent pattern that we actually see throughout these nations, which will bring us into chapter 19. Chapter 19, I think, is a very easy, like a one sentence can be used to describe chapter 19, and I like to think of it as just the humbling of Egypt is essentially what this is. Now again, like when I say humbling, a lot of people think of it in multiple different ways, but what I mean here is you think you're up here and you're going to be brought down a little bit lower, and actually through God's humbling, he breaks them down and then he builds them up how they're supposed to be, and we'll see that consistently. Now, I could go into depths about the destruction that comes upon the Nile, right? We all know, if we've gone to like 6th grade history, how important the Nile really is, right? So the Nile was actually bringing any type of vegetation into Egypt. They basically worship the Nile. So it's no wonder that God actually destroys the Nile, poisons it, dries everything up, because that's what's giving them their lifeline, and they actually are worshiping that through a couple of different gods. And if you look into the Exodus, you actually see all of the miracles that are performed by Moses during that time directly correlate with an attack on one of their gods that they have exalted higher than the God, and that's why they're actually being attacked. So there's a lot I could go into there, but that's not the focus of what I want to talk about today. So I want to point out the last verse in this chapter. This is the one I want to focus on here. There's a lot in it. There's one thing that really stood out to me, and it's, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. We went over the difference, right, of Israel, or the Jews, and God's children now through the new covenant, right? We talked about that in the book of Romans, being grafted into the branch. And Paul states in the book of Romans, he says he has not forgotten his people, but he's actually giving a way for us to be grafted into the branch of God. And that is what we need to focus on here. Is I think it's time that we understand, it's time that we really focus, because so many people will be like, Israel is no longer something that we need to focus on because now we have been grafted into the branch. But Paul even states, like, God's not done with his chosen people. God's not done with the nation of Israel, and he's coming back for them. He's just allowing us to also be grafted into it. And he kind of gives us this glimpse into this when he says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people," right? So he's not saying that Israel is no longer his people. He's saying Egypt is my people, Assyria is the work of my hands, and Israel is my inheritance. So you can see that all of them are in there, and he's not forgetting Israel, but he's adding in Egypt and Assyria, and that gives us this great glimpse into the new covenant, into what we have been brought into under the blood of Jesus, is that grafted into the branch, not replacing Israel by any means, but actually being grafted in alongside them. They are not lessened by any means, but we are actually brought up a little bit. And I think it's good to just take a moment and just thank God for the love that, and the choices that he made to allow us to be part of his children. Which will bring me into chapter 20, the last chapter of this week's study. We get an illustration of what will become of Egypt and Cush, okay? This isn't the only time that God actually uses the prophet himself to illustrate something, not just through words, but actually acting it out as part of his life. We'll see it in the book of Hosea. We've gone over that a few times, how Hosea's life being married to the woman of whoredom, right, the prostitute, actually gives us the description of Jesus buying us back, even though he had us in the first place. We've gone into that a couple of times, but that's not really the focus. I don't want to focus so much on the illustration, but the why for the illustration. So obviously we see in here that God tells Isaiah, the son of Amos, "Go and loose the sackcloth from your waist and take off the sandals from your feet." And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. So this is giving us a description of what will happen to Egypt and to Assyria. Oh, sorry, not Assyria, Cush. And so instead of focusing on the fact that that's how they were led away, let's focus on why. Why were they led away that way? If you look at the last two verses in this chapter, right, in chapter 20, we actually see the reason. So people were running from the nations, running to the nations of Egypt and Cush to look for protection from the Assyrians, not to God. That's who they were. They were like, you guys are a powerful country, so we're going to come under your protection, protect us from Assyria. And we see that all throughout the Bible is actually constantly people going, okay, I'll make a deal with you if you protect me from these people, and then I'll protect them. And it just kind of goes in a circle where it's like, as long as we protect each other, we'll be good. And God's like, that's wrong. That's not what you should be doing. Stop looking to people to save you when I am your God. Turn back to me. And so what he does is he shows them how little and unpowerful the things we try to hide behind really are, right? These things that we bring forth, these things that we give power to, he's like, I'm going to lower them and embarrass them and lower them to the level that they truly are, so you see how exalted I really am. And it's kind of a humbling moment here where they're like, even the greatest powers of this time are nothing compared to Assyria, and God's saying they're nothing compared to me. See, the problem is we look at this judgment that's coming and we're like, wow, this judgment is awful, but we're not looking at the one who's putting the judgment upon these nations. Instead, we're looking at the nation that he uses and we're like, wow, they have so much power, but in reality, it's God's power being shown through these people to bring everyone back to him. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit here. So these chapters go a lot into prophecy of judgment and hope for the nations, right? This is like the bulk of these chapters that go into the prophecy of the other nations without the focus of Israel or Jerusalem on them. Obviously, they're still part of it, but they're not like the main focus. And it's really easy to get lost and confused in the prophecies when we do a study like this. It's very easy to be focused on why Egypt, why Assyria, why Cush, why Philistia, why Babylon. It's so easy to look into those, why Moab, any of that. And what happens is we get so focused on why is this happening to this country, we kind of stray away from the reason that this was happening in the first place, which was to bring us back to God. And I know I've stated it every single week, but you have to find God in the scriptures or you're going to get lost in the scriptures and then try to place God into them, when you just have to find him in it, and then you'll see this revelation that he's actually trying to bring to you. It's not understand what's happening to Egypt and then put God back into it, understand why God was doing that, when in reality it was to reveal himself to the Egyptians. I think the simple answer for that question, though, would be these countries were leading the Israelites away from God in some way, right? They were bringing their idols, they were bringing their worldly way of life into the Israelites' life. To some extent, I'm not going to say that the Israelites had no part of it, because they absolutely did. In fact, God multiple times was like, don't do that, kill all of them, because it's going to affect your nation. And they're like, it should be fine. And they just continue to do their own path. So absolutely the Israelites are part of the problem, but God's showing them, like, I'm the only option. Like, you can put whatever you want in the way, but the truth is, I am the most powerful. I'm the Almighty. I am the Ancient of Days. I'm the Lord of Hosts, as it states in Isaiah over and over again. And he's trying to bring them back to himself, is what he's trying to do here. And so he's showing us these nations that they considered so powerful at the time in what will become of them. And then he's showing himself in it by placing this hope back into the scriptures. So God showed us the righteous judgment that was coming upon him, right? God made sure that we knew what was happening. I mean, he goes into description, he goes into judgment after judgment, destruction after destruction, but he doesn't stop there, right? He then shows us the hope. So as you read these scriptures, right, we're going to go more in depth on Wednesday, but right now, as you read the scriptures, as you go over the questions, as you kind of try to understand the prophecies that we've read so far, I really want you to look for the hope that was put into these scriptures. Don't just stop at, wow, that nation fell, that nation sucks, any of that. Don't just go, woe to that nation, but where is God in this moment? Why is God doing what he's doing? Make sure that you put God, or you find God in the scriptures, okay? That's what's going to bring you this understanding of it. You guys have told me you don't 100% understand what we're reading. It's very difficult to understand if you're trying to understand it and then put God into it. So put God into it, and then the understanding will come. I'm hoping that this helps a little bit. So, read, ask questions, use your resources, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.